coast. And John is a volunteer at the Wembury Marine Centre. Since 2003, he's a snorkeling instructor with Blue Sound, and he's been running this citizen science project, tagging the nursehounds or the bullhuss, since 2014, supported by the Shark Trust. So that is basically the background to it. So I should now hand you over to John.
Good evening. Thank you. About this time in 2014, I was snorkeling off Wembury Point, and I'd seen nursehound egg cases before, and suddenly found about 3 or 4 of them new laid. And I thought, when are they going to hatch then? So I asked around, and it appeared that people didn't really know. It was thought that it was about 9 months, but you know, in detail, it wasn't really known. So I got hold of the Shark Trust people at the Southwest Marine Ecosystems Conference and said, would it be useful, would it be ethical for me to go and tag these things and see when they're laid and how long they take to hatch and stuff like that? And they said, yes, it would be. Go for it. So I did. And in April 2014, I did my first bit of tagging. And I'll tell you how it's gone. I should point out that the videos in this may be a bit jerky, which is very likely due to the slow upload speed at this end. So for those of you who don't know Wembury Point, there's the Mewstone, and this is the entrance to the gully where the egg cases are. There's a little island there, sorry, wrong there, and a long thin island there, and the stretch of water between is the gully. And it's about a 200-meter walk out across the rocks to get to it, until eventually you come to a subsidiary gully, and you wade through that, and there you are looking at the Mewstone, ready to go snorkeling. These egg cases have been there for, well, probably 100 years or more. Joe Orton wrote an article in Nature in November 1926 saying it is well known that the nursehound breeds regularly in the gullies at Wembury Point West, which I think are probably mine. So having got a project, you have to have some project aims, and these were to find out when they lay their eggs, how long they take to hatch, what's the success rate, and what affects it. And as a bonus, particularly for the Shark Trust, because they're running the great egg case hunt, where people are reporting egg cases washed up on the beach, but they have no idea where they've come from. If we get any stranded egg cases with the tags on, they would be the first to show where they'd actually come from in the water. So how do we do it? First of all, find a friend, or better still, 2 friends. In this case, we found that 3 friends was actually 1 too many. We got ourselves so confused. That was about this time of year, actually, and the water was very cold. We spent 2 hours in it, confused ourselves, and actually ended up missing some egg cases, surprisingly. Get all the gear together. So there's a camera, and I now know you need to take a spare camera as well. Scissors for cutting off the tags, cable ties to attach them, plastic bag to keep the waste in, torch so that you can see inside the egg case, and a big diver's slate to write it all down on. You get in the water and you go swimming. This is a view of the gully, and all being well, we'll get a little video of what it looks like. It's quite shallow at its deepest at low water. This is low water springs. It's sort of chest high. So we swim down there until we find an egg case, and then we put the tag on it. So I then assess and photograph the egg cases. Candled is an expression that comes from the old sort of dairy industry, where they used to shine a candle behind an egg to see whether it was addled or not. And we do the same. So the tags are these binary tags. I started off just by using inch square bits cut out of a plastic milk bottle with the number written on, and discovered that permanent ink in the water is far from permanent. So the binary tags, if you take the 6 holes of a die, there's 6 spots on a dice, the positions on there, and the first one is 1, the second one's 2, 4, 8, 16, and 32. Add them all together, you get 63, and with a blank one, you've got a series of 64. So to indicate which series you're on, I cut off a corner, so that shows it's the second series. So this is 213, because we've got hole 1, hole 4, and hole 8, making 13. Which sounds really simple, but actually after you've been in the water for an hour and a half and the water's below 10 degrees, the little old brain starts to struggle with that. But that's one reason for making sure you get a picture of the tag, so you know which one it is. Now, assessing them, there's been a study done at Manchester University on the stages of development and trying to create a simplified version of the maxi scientific one, which has about 15 stages, which they hoped could be used by people in the field. And they were quite pleased to find that there actually were people in the field. They were slightly surprised to discover that it wasn't quite as easy as they thought, because the egg cases get biofouling on them, and seeing inside them can be really quite difficult. But they did 7 stages, and what we've done is to break that down into 4. So when it's freshly laid, and the next bit you can't see the difference between its egg. Then when you get that little blip on it, it becomes stage 3. In fact, with experience, that one really ought to be merged. Developing is much easier to see because you can start to see the Nursehound inside starting to wriggle about. Well developed, they're quite big and they're obviously ready to go, and then hatched. So there's a new laid one. No biofouling on it. And here's one which is developing, and if it's not too jerky, you can just make out the tail wriggling away inside. There's one getting better developed, and you can see the biofouling starting to grow on the outside of the egg case. Now that one's quite well developed. That one's pretty well ready to pop. As the Nursehound develops and its need for oxygen gets greater, the top end of the egg case opens up. And if you squeeze the ends together, you can have a look inside. And with your TG4 or TG6 on focus stacking, you can get a nice picture inside, which ideally shows quite a lot of the shark. Sometimes you can see a little face looking out at you, which is rather cute. And there's one that's hatched. I think we've seen 2 actually hatch out. And on both occasions, it was onto the above the waterline. On that particular one, here it is actually hatching out. We'd already inspected it and had a look inside, and when we came back along the route, we found that it was starting to hatch. So, taking into account the fact that it might have hatched early rather than waiting for the tide to come in, and it was actually our fault, we felt that we shouldn't just leave it all to nature and then for him to become a food for a seagull, and we put him into the water. And hopefully off he went. And on the biofouling, that's one that's sort of got medium fouling. There's one that's heavy fouled. And you get all sorts of things growing on them. There's some sort of worm that's created a tube of bits and pieces around itself. There's a yassa, or jassa, I'm not quite sure how you pronounce them, amphipod that's managed to create something to burrow in. And we get blue-rayed limpets, or timples as we call them in Wembury. And funnily enough, they can actually stay there for quite a long time. You know, for 3 or 4 sightings on the same egg case, and bearing in mind that the frequency is no better than once a fortnight to coincide with spring tides. Whether it's exactly the same blue-rayed limpet, I don't know, because I haven't done face recognition on blue-rayed limpets. And then we record the results. That's one of the good reasons to have a friend, because it is actually really quite difficult to do all this on your own. And people like Tegan and Joe, who I think are here tonight, have been and helped do that. Really makes a difference. Record the environmental data, which basically is the temperature. We've tried to get a temperature logger. The university lent us one, and we couldn't actually get the data off it in the end. And when we did find the data off it, it recorded the temperature every second for about a fortnight, which we didn't need that sort of detail. So we're just taking the temperature on the trips that we go on. I keep a record of, from the Met Office, last 24 hours of what the wind has blown over the last 24 hours, and record any day where the wind has blown more than 20 miles an hour. That's as a sort of substitute for when it's been stormy. Because it did occur to me that one of the reasons why some of these egg cases might not hatch is because they get blown away by the weather. And I've started recently making a note of the barometer, because that makes quite a difference to the tidal height, which makes quite a difference to how difficult it is to actually do the dive. Bearing in mind that temperature does drop below 10 degrees, I've not got an awful lot of blubber on, so I wear a 7mm semi-dry wetsuit with a 5mm one over the top of that, and I am very buoyant. Unfortunately, my buddies are getting quite good at holding me down, and have stopped worrying too much about being reported to the police from walkers on the coastal path seen trying to drown their dive buddy. But it's actually quite difficult. I can tell from my position under the water that they're finding difficulty just pressing straight down on the centre of buoyancy. So having recorded them, put them all on a big spreadsheet, we can calculate the lay-hatch interval. And I assume that they've hatched midway between the last 2 sightings. And because the first sighting is not quite so easy to work out, I've just add a 10-day period on the beginning to calculate them. If the interval between the sighting when they're hatched and the last time it was seen with something inside is too long, like something like a month and a half, 2 months, then we don't reckon that that's a good enough record to indicate what its hatching interval is. So when I started doing this, I made a number of assumptions that all the egg cases would be found, that all the egg cases were likely to hatch, that you could see what's going on inside, that it was easy to tell when they hatched, and I'd make no mistakes. All of those assumptions turned out to be wrong, because you do miss egg cases on the dive. We don't know how many of them actually do hatch, because some of the ones that are lost might have hatched. The biofouling makes it difficult to see what's inside, and actually when they're at some depth, until we discovered that you could actually poke it, have a look inside, it's really quite difficult, and even then it can be quite difficult to tell whether they're hatched. And I've made lots of mistakes, and here are some of them. So in May 2020, I found an untagged egg case, but it was certainly not new laid. You can see the amount of biofouling on it. So I put a tag on it as number 350. And when I got back home, I looked at the GPS position of it, and there were no other egg cases with that GPS position, but I looked closely at pictures of egg cases from around and found that the position of it and the twists on the tendrils here matched 325, which had been laid 6 months earlier in December. And the sharp-eyed amongst you might notice there is a black cable tie. And this video shows you just how inept I have been on that one. I'd obviously got the cable tie going the wrong way round into the cable tie, so the ratchet didn't work. And I was so keen on taking the pictures that I didn't notice the tag floating off. And there it goes. And that's an even worse mistake, because on that one, if you were paying attention to what I was saying, how the binary tags work, that's not 432, that should actually be 416. I put the hole in the wrong place of a whole stretch of them. And we put nearly all of those on egg cases, and then came back afterwards and said, hang on, we've got 2 416s, when all the writing had rubbed off. And that took quite a lot of effort to work out which were the duplicates, which was the right 416, which was the wrong 416, remake all the egg cases and put the tags and put the new tags back on. And here is one of those, oh, Sierra Hotel 1 Tango moments. Those of you who've got a TG4 or a TG6 will notice at the bottom there, the door's open. They don't like that. They don't survive. But I must say that the cooperative household insurance are very, very good, understanding and swift at paying up for a new one. There are also lots of distractions which we didn't expect to find. Nudibranchs, crabs, 15-spine stickerbacks, all sorts of things. And there were hazards from fishing gear. So there's a grey sea slug. And I'm particularly proud of having spotted that, that top knot. And I hope you can see it. Stalk jellyfishes, really difficult to get pictures on because they just never seem to focus. And last week with Joe, there was this lovely little long spine sea scorpion who just sat there and had his picture taken. Either he thought he was so well camouflaged that we couldn't see him, or he just thought that, hey, I'm gorgeous. And last week we had lots of sea hares, with some of them disguising themselves as weeds, some of them just hanging about on the deck. Really, I was swimming down the gully on my own and realised there was a gill net stretched across the gully. So I took my fins off and walked round it. But when I got back in the water, I thought I'd just have a look at it from in the water. And you really cannot see these things. So I reported it to the IFCA, but it had gone by the following day. Now, some of the results. When do they lay their eggs? Now, the accepted wisdom is that they're mainly in the summer, which is true. The highest averages are for May and June, but there's a surprising number right throughout the year. And how long do they take to hatch? The average is 260 something days, but it's rather skewed by the fact that there are 3 or 4 outliers that hatched within about 3 months, which really makes the mode different. But by and large, it is about 9 months. And does that have any relevance to when they're hatched? So the numbers hatched mostly in the summer, but surprisingly, the success rate is highest for those in the winter. You can see the December layers have got an 80% chance of surviving, whereas the June layers only 40 something percent. But it's not a straight line curve at all. And I couldn't find any great correlation between the date of laying and the hatching interval, as those figures there, which I hope you can see, indicate. And the success rate. So we tagged 225 of them up until now. We know the 111 of them have hatched, and half of that were good records. So we've only got 25% of all those that were laid that we've got a good record on. It's conventional wisdom is that the hatching interval is based on temperature. Now, when Tegan did her research on it, she found that there was a correlation between average temperature and hatching interval. But I must admit, I could never actually understand her statistics and couldn't make that work myself. So on a very simplistic level, what I've done there is taken the hatching interval for the average of those laid in each month, and then the average of the average temperatures. So it's definitely suspect that I'm taking averages and averages of averages, but that didn't show that there was that much correlation between hatching interval and temperature. So I think the jury is still a bit out on that. The legs, the eggs are mostly laid on what was Cystostera tamariscifolia, which I always thought was a lovely name for a weed, and it was a bit like supercalifragilisticexpialidocious, that if you say it loud enough, you'll sure to sound precocious. Then they changed it in short order twice, so it's now Ericaria selaginoides, however you pronounce that, I have no idea. And that is a really tough weed. It sticks to the rock like glue. It's the one that turns blue. And if you've been wading around rock pools in the summer or doing some snorkeling and you find this bright blue weed, that's it. And that sticks there come hell or high water. Although sometimes quite a lot of it this winter's been washed away. But most of the nurse hounds seem to know to go for those and go for the really strong ones. Those that get it wrong and lay it on kelp, they don't tend to come good. Now, is there predation of them? That's one that I saw before I started the project. And you can see this neat, round and chamfered hole. And it's about the size of a 20p piece. And no one really knows what did that. And it's also been found, there's a lady in Italy who's doing a similar survey of nursehounds in the Bay of Naples, but they're at 30 odd meters. So she can go down whenever she likes, except that she hasn't got that much time for doing a citizen science project because she's got a real job to do. And she said that she'd found holes like that and thought that it was possibly due to the murex. But as we don't get murexes in this country, we do get the common whelk, but talking to fishermen, whelks, when they drill holes, drill them much smaller than that. So that is a bit of a mystery, but it's not totally unknown because there is another one. That's a much older egg case and it's rather battered after the predation, but I'm pretty sure that's another one of those holes. The sort of predation you find, or attempted predation that you find, are these sort of nicks taken out of the outer part of the casing. And quite often they don't go all the way through. And we surmise that that's due to crabs, velvet swimmers, or someone like that with really sharp claws. Sometimes they really have a go at them. And if you look at the tag on there, if you ever tried tearing bits off a plastic milk bottle, that's really difficult. So whoever it was that went for that had a really good go at it. But who did that? Not sure if it's immediately obvious, but this egg case has just been ripped in half across the top. And I think we found 2 or maybe 3 like that out of 255. And what I wonder is, if anything is capable of doing that, why does it only do it to 1? Why doesn't it just go down the gully and rip the tops off all of them and eat them all? I don't know if you remember a few years ago, there was I think it was a David Attenborough documentary about South Africa. And they had baboons who would go down at low water springs and eat dogfish eggs from out of their egg cases. But we don't have baboons in Wembury Point. I suppose we might have foxes, we might have otters. It's possible that it's seals, but I'd still like to know why anything that could do that only does it for 1. On the bonus side, we got 3 tagged cases, which were recovered about 500 meters from the hatchery. And then there's an unexpected bonus. Tegan Console was a student at Plymouth University and a volunteer at the Shark Trust. And she did her student dissertation on the egg cases and did a very good job of it, got a very good degree, and even better than that, she applied for the P1 Foundation Awards and was a joint runner-up. Went up to London to get her award, and I met Imogen Napper of microplastics fame a couple of days later, and she said, I met your friend Tegan the other day at London. You know, she was the only undergraduate in the prizes. So well done, Tegan. And Jo Wakeham, who's a member of this group, she was doing her foundation degree, and she's done her dissertation on the egg cases as well. And they both got firsts, which is nice. There was a bloke in between who turned up for one dive, never saw him again, and I have no idea what happened to him. So, any questions? Mike?
Yeah, hi, John. Thanks for a fantastic talk.